Hello and welcome once again to our Better Know a Poet series. Today we're going to do B for Browning, Robert Browning. Browning is considered one of the greatest poets in the Victorian era in the 19th century. He had a very interesting life. He was born in 1812, but basically lived with his parents until he was about 34 years old. He didn't leave until 1846 when he married Elizabeth Barrett. He spent the first several years of his life essentially teaching himself. He was known as one of the greatest, what's called an autodidact, one of the greatest self taught men in English history. He spent maybe one semester, one session, they would call it, one semester at college, but then decided to come home. His father had this huge personal library, and so he essentially spent what would be his college years reading through every single book in his father's library. The end result was that he became the most educated poet since Milton. He could read several languages, and he just had an incredible depth of knowledge on every subject under the sun: philosophy, psychology, science, religion. And out of that great depth of knowledge came his very obscure sometimes, but very critically astute verses. Another big date for his life was 1841, where a famous actor from the time, William Macready, convinced him to write what were called dramatic monologues, essentially poems that would be like actors giving a speech. So they would be poems, but it'd be like this fictional character speaking from a stage. So instead of a poem kind of getting inside the head of the poet, it'd be this other fictional character. And it'd be like they were giving a monologue on a stage. So 90% of his poetry is in this dramatic monologue form. His first book of poems came out in 1846 called Bells and Pomegranates. His next critical success, or his next popular success, was in 1855 with Men and Women, and then in 1864 with Dramatis Personae. And it was really not until 1864 that he achieved critical success. So in the 1860s and 70s, he became lionized, meaning he became a literary celebrity from that time and was invited all over England to speak and talk about his poetry. Another important date for Robert Browning is 1845, when he met and fell in love with Elizabeth Barrett. They had correspondences over several months, and then in 1846, he eloped with her to Florence, to Italy. The father was a very austere man, would not let his daughters leave the house. On top of that, Elizabeth was basically an invalid. But Robert and she eloped together. They were married for only 15 years when she died in Florence. Again, someone who was not well in health generally. Um, but her marriage to Robert basically extended her life for several years. His real big critical and popular success came in 1868 and 1869 with the publication of his epic called The Ring and the Book. And it's a several book epic, just like Paradise Lost or The Prelude, where he took several people involved in a murder trial in Rome from the 17th century, and he gave their point of view through their different speeches. So it's like several dramatic monologues all put together on the same subject, and it's this trial, right, for this crime from everybody involved's point of view, from the husband, the supposed murderer, to the wife who was murdered, to the people in the court, the defendant, prosecutor, right, and all of that, and even the public. The public has a whole book to themselves. Um, Robert Browning died in 1889. Since then, his dramatic monologues have come to be seen as one of the most unique in English poetic history. Again, with these monologues, it's a character actually speaking, and what's important is not what they say, but what they don't say, right? So, what they avoid and how they reveal their character through these monologues. So, what we're going to read right now is one of his first monologues. This is from the Bells and Pomegranate series. This is called My Last Duchess. It's a very popular one and is part of what was called the Mad Cell poems, what today we would call the Insane Asylum poems. So it's a dramatic monologue by somebody who we are meant to understand is mentally ill in some way. And in this case, it's a duke who's obsessive compulsive about his previous wife. So this is My Last Duchess. That's my last Duchess painted on the wall, looking as if she were alive. I call that piece a wonder now. Frau Pandolf's hands worked busily a day, and there she stands. Will it please you sit and look at her? I said Frau Pandolf by design. For never read strangers like you that pictured countenance, the depth and passion of its earnest glance. But to myself they turned, since none puts by the curtain I have drawn for you but I, and seemed as they would ask me, if they durst, how such a glance came there. So, not the first are you to turn and ask it us. Sir, 'twas not her husband's presence only called that spot of joy into the Duchess' cheek. Perhaps Frau Pandolf chanced to say, her mantle laps over my lady's wrist too much. Or, paint must never hope to reproduce the faint half flush that dies along her throat. Such stuff was courtesy, she thought, and cause enough for calling up that spot of joy. She had a heart, how shall I say, too soon made glad, too easily impressed. She liked whate'er she looked on, and her looks went everywhere. Sir, 'twas all one. My favour at her breast, the dropping of the daylight in the west, the bough of cherries some officious fool broke in the orchard for her, the white mule she rode with round the terrace, all and each would draw from her alike the approving speech, or blush at least. She thanked men, good, but thanked somehow, I know not how, as if she ranked my gift of a 900 years old name with anybody's gift. Who'd stoop to blame this sort of trifling? Even had you skill in speech, which I have not, to make your will quite clear to such a one and say, just this or that in you disgusts me, or here you miss or there exceed the mark. And if she let herself be lessoned so, or plainly set her wits to yours forsooth and made excuse, even then would be some stooping. And I choose never to stoop. Oh, sir, she smiled no doubt whene'er I passed her, but who passed without much the same smile? This grew, I gave commands, then all smiles stopped together. There she stands, as if alive. Will it please you rise? We'll meet the company below then. I repeat, the Count your master's known munificence is ample warrant that no just pretence of mine for dowry will be disallowed, though his fair daughter's self, as I avowed at starting, is my object. Nay, we'll go together down, sir. Notice Neptune, though, taming a sea-horse, thought a rarity, which Claus of Innsbruck cast in bronze for me. See you tomorrow.